Hey everyone. So at this point I've covered a whole lot of the classic Karens from the 2019 to 2021 era, but I have yet to cover one of the most notorious Karens of that era, perhaps of all time, the Central Park Karen. And the deeper I got into this story for the research part of this, the more complex and interesting this web became. There has been so much reporting on this story, most of it poor and missing a ton of pieces, but I have done my absolute best here to give you a fair and thorough account of what happened. Our story begins on May 25th of 2020, which is significant for two reasons. First, it was the very beginning of COVID still, so everyone is confused and worried and tense as it is, but second, this is also the exact same day that the George Floyd incident occurred in Minneapolis. So consider that this is a very fresh wound at the time and the racial tensions are very, very high going forward. So on May 25th, in a section of Manhattan's massive Central Park called The Ramble, a 41-year-old woman named Amy Cooper had her dog off-leash in an area of The Ramble where dog leashes are required. And for good reason, the protection of the carefully preserved wildlife that inhabits this area. As she's wandering around with her unleashed dog, a local birdwatcher named Christian Cooper, and no, the two are not related, they don't know each other at all, is birdwatching. When the two cross paths, Christian asks Amy up front to leash her dog, and when she allegedly declined, Christian produced a dog treat and beckoned the dog toward him. Amy became concerned and said, "Don't you touch my dog," at which point Christian pulled out his phone and started recording the following video.
Would you please stop? Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African-American, he has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And my... I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately. I'm in Central Park in the Ramble. I don't know.
Thank you.
The recording went absurdly, insanely, outrageously viral, with over 40 million views on Christian Cooper's sister's Twitter copy of the clip alone. And this was probably, after the death of George Floyd, the biggest social media story of the week, maybe the month. Now, a whole lot of people accused Amy of weaponizing the police because of this, saying she was being threatened by an African American and specifically referencing his race 3 different times in the span of about a minute. And because she said that in the video, and perhaps for the simple fact that this was an incident with a white woman calling the cops, seemingly unjustifiably, on a black man, this incident went viral through the lens of the country's newly refreshed racial division. There was also a horde of angry dog lovers, as an aside, who had a huge problem with the way she was holding her dog here. As a consequence, some of the characterizations of Amy Cooper were brutal. Some of the most charged commentary on Twitter and YouTube accused her of attempting to end this man's life on purpose by calling the police on him, and countless others accused her of racism and weaponizing the police against a black man. Gayle King declared it was open season on black Americans, and Trevor Noah told his audience that Amy blatantly knew how to use the power of her whiteness. Some people even compared her to Emmett Till on the internet. The characterizations of Amy Cooper got so brutal, in fact, that Christian Cooper himself started to wonder if the response was proportionate, telling NPR, "I'm not really sure that her 1 minute of poor decision-making, bad judgment, and, without question, racist response necessarily has to define her completely." And something I found interesting about him specifically saying this is that his sister, Melody, was actually one of the people who compared Amy Cooper to Emmett Till. The very next day, so May 26th, both Coopers spoke with ABC News 4, a local channel out of New York. Christian Cooper explains his actions as motivated by a desire to keep the wildlife safe, which does seem in character for a birdwatcher. On the other hand, Amy offered a profuse apology as a press release, no doubt recognizing the dog poop that she had stepped in here doing something like this the same day as what had just happened in Minnesota. But you'll notice, despite her apology here, she does maintain that she did the right thing in calling the police, and even claims that what we don't see on the camera is the aggressive way Christian was acting before the camera turned on. Another significant development from that day, her employer was discovered to be an investment firm called Franklin Templeton, and they did not want anything to do with Amy Cooper after this, releasing the following tweet, which said, "Following our initial review of the incident in Central Park yesterday, we have made the decision to terminate the employee involved, effective immediately." So she kind of got wrecked right off the bat here, like literally 24 hours between incident and termination. But this was really just the beginning of Amy Cooper's nightmare, because as a result of this, Amy also surrendered her dog, Henry, the one she was borderline choking out here while the incident was occurring, to the rescue that she got him from in the first place, called Abandoned Angels. On Monday, July 6th of 2020, things went from bad to worse for Amy when Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance announced that his office had initiated a prosecution of Amy Cooper for falsely reporting an incident in the third degree, with a court date scheduled for October 14th. And if you thought that charge stemmed from the first phone call to police that we hear in the video, that's not actually where this charge comes from. In fact, it's revealed during her October 14th court appearance that she had actually called the police a second time on Christian Cooper, a call during which she told police that Cooper had tried to assault her. While her life steadily continued to unravel and facing charges that could land her up to a year in jail, she wouldn't see any hope of relief until February 16th, 2021, when the New York Assistant District Attorney, Joan Illuzzi, reportedly told the judge, quote, "Given the issues at hand and Miss Cooper's lack of criminal background, we offered her, consistent with our position on many misdemeanor cases involving a first-time arrest, an alternative restorative justice resolution." Cooper was subject, instead of jail, to a total of 5 therapy sessions, which her therapist described as a moving experience, and contended that Amy had made a lot of progress. But she did avoid a year of jail and potentially a big fine, so that probably felt like a W for her, all things considered. And apparently this small victory emboldened her to strike while the iron was hot, because on May 26, 2021, Amy filed a lawsuit against her former employer, Franklin Templeton, saying she was fired because of racial discrimination against her by the firm and gender discrimination. Now, in that lawsuit, which strikes a very different tone from the one that she struck when she released her initial statement, she kind of makes her real feelings known. And there's a lot of backpedaling here from her first apology that she issued exactly actually 1 year prior to this. She says in the suit that the incident had nothing to do with race, but her being frightened to death of being alone in a park. She also describes Christian as overzealous and even accuses him of selecting her as a target. A target of what? We don't know. Anyway, her core argument in the lawsuit is that her employer didn't bother to thoroughly investigate the situation, instead reaching its decision because, as Amy puts it, she was a white woman. The company's spokesperson responded pretty much immediately by standing by their decision and called the claims baseless. And I just have to point out, this seems to sort of contradict the idea that she went through all this therapy for her punishment after court and was a changed person who understood all the errors of her ways now and wanted to put it all behind her. This seems to be her doubling down in a way after playing nice with the courts to get maybe a lighter punishment and then smiling and nodding and saying the right things in therapy. We don't know that, but it seems likely. We, of course, also have the conclusion to the lawsuit, which we got in September of 21. But in between, something else big happened, something huge. Amy Cooper appeared for over an hour on Barry Weiss's podcast after a journalist named Camille Foster got hold of some other people who say they have also had problems with this guy, Christian Cooper, while they were walking their dogs in Central Park. This guy appeared on several shows and podcasts, like Megyn Kelly's, and Barry Weiss's in particular is interesting because it's the first time that we've heard from Amy since her incident went viral the previous year. And she gives us her perspective on why she acted the way she did, and I found some of these answers rather surprising, and certainly interesting and pertinent to the story. First, she talks about a character in the story who we haven't given much attention to yet. Henry, the dog that she was holding in the video, and holding in such a way that many people expressed concern for the dog.
He's 3 years old now, and he's just amazing.
Amy was one of those dog owners who had a whole Instagram account for her dog.
He's become highly certified. He's canine good citizen. He's done therapy level training work, support systems for children. He was working in a child autism program at one point, getting certified there just because he responds so well to people that are in distress and need help.
A lot of her life revolved around this dog.
I'm a big believer in that dogs should not be cooped up in, 500 square foot apartments. So I would wake up early in the morning, take him for an hour walk him again in the afternoon. I'd come home in the evening, walk him 2-3 times,
So it turns out she had a whole Instagram for Henry. It was trained, it was certified to help people with autism, the whole shebang. And actually, while we're on the subject, Amy got her dog back. This is important, from the shelter that took her from Amy back when the incident occurred. So they were reunited after the shelter found no evidence of abuse or anything like that on the dog. Next, she explains that she was walking her dog in a totally different area for most of the walk, not the bramble, but when it started to get later in the afternoon, she headed through some areas she wasn't so familiar with.
The challenge is there's not a lot of great ways if you're on the east side to get back to the west side, so I just chose to take this north edge path that just runs on the north edge of the ramble.
And now she gets into her play-by-play of what happened that fateful day when Christian Cooper approached her.
And we're walking through there. He picked up a stick and, I threw it for him, thinking I was going to call him back. And suddenly I heard this, loud booming voice behind me, screaming something to the effect of, get out of here, or you shouldn't be here, or something like that.
And what was your first thought?
Whenever you hear something loud, you naturally just startle a little bit. And I turned around and, immediately saw this man standing there looking, like he's very annoyed and that I'm in there and invading the space.
Do you remember what you said to him at that point?
I remember my focus was really on getting my dog back to me. And then he utters something that, sounds to me like a threat, that he's going to do something to me I'm not going to like. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
And then she says that the man, who we now know is Christian Cooper, says to her, if you're going to do what you want to do, then I'm going to do what I want to do. But you're not going to like it.
Now, Amy isn't really telling us all that much new information about the way that Christian worded this, because it matches Christian's detailed play-by-play of the incident that he posted on his own Facebook the day after the incident. If you're gonna do what you want to do, then I'm gonna do what I want to do, but you're not gonna like it, was exactly what Christian told us he said. So it's not like he was hiding his real verbiage here. But at least according to Amy, and remember, grain of salt, there are obvious motivations for spin here on Amy's part. According to Amy, he says this and then immediately pulls a dog treat out of one hand and starts beckoning the dog over, all while holding a bike helmet in his other hand.
And I'm trying to figure out, what does that mean? Is that a physical attack on me? Is that to my dog? Like, what is he about to do? And before I could even figure it out and can process this, he has this giant, I don't know if it's a fanny pack / knapsack, it's on his front. And he pulls out dog treats. And I'm like, what the heck is this guy doing? And I look up and, he's holding this dog treats in one hand and a bike helmet in his other hand. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, is this guy going to lure my dog over and try to hit him with this bike helmet?
So according to Amy's account, it wasn't Christian's skin color that made her afraid. It was the way that he went about the approach. She was afraid he meant he was going to do something to her dog or her. And to be fair to Amy, that does sound like a rather menacing thing to say to a woman alone in a secluded part of the park, but everyone knew what he said already. But it was a weird approach on Christian's part for sure. And it would be entirely fair to doubt Amy's characterization of how he approached this. Like I said before, she has every reason to spin this. But Camille went one step further. He had heard rumors in the city, New York City, of several disputes happening around this time between other birdwatchers and other off-leash dog people in the park. Meaning there was actually a whole niche war going on here the past couple of months, apparently, and Camille discovered that Christian Cooper had been an active part of this war, even discovering an audio tape of him speaking at a city meeting about the problem.
One of the unintended side effects of the entire pandemic situation with people adopting dogs and people taking their dogs out because they have to be walked is that we have now sort of a byproduct epidemic of unleashed dogs in protected areas. And I want to preface this by saying this is not anti-dog. I grew up with an English Cocker Spaniel and I love dogs. Don't put that out there because my rep as a dog hater serves me well in the park. It's getting super ugly between birders and unleashed dog walkers. I've been assaulted twice so far this spring. People actually putting their hands on me, which really surprises me because I'm not a small guy. So it would be ideal if we could get some enforcement, particularly on Strawberry Fields, which I've been told by some dog walkers is actually a dog run. I'm like, no, not really. Also in the Ramble, there are two particular spots where there are open fields and people see them and they think this is a place for me to play catch with my dog. I'm wondering what we can get for enforcement. It's also important for the dogs.
So this was actually a whole crusade of Christians. Get it? But this discovery led Camille to discover that Christian had apparently approached several other owners in the dog park in the same way that he had approached Amy. While two of the three he got a hold of weren't comfortable putting their names on record because of the sensitivity of the issue, they were willing to talk about their experiences.
So this is the pattern that emerged from the conversations I had with these folks. First, Christian Cooper was yelling at people and approaching them in a way that made them feel scared. And then he'd say something about doing what he wanted to do and that they wouldn't like it. Then he'd try to lure their dogs away from them, which he says already in his own Facebook transcript that this was something he would do with some regularity. Mm-hmm. And then there's this detail about him gripping the bike helmet in a way that made them feel threatened for their safety or the safety of their dog.
One person even offered a full statement of a confrontation he had with Christian Cooper himself.
I was able to track down people who claimed to have had encounters with Christian Cooper in the park in the months and weeks before his encounter with Amy Cooper. And the stories that they told me were all eerily similar to the account that Amy gives, down to the detail of Christian Cooper having this bike helmet that he's holding in this intimidating way. And while none of these people were actually comfortable talking to me about this on the record, we do have a written statement from one person, a man named Jerome Lockett. He is a 30-year-old African-American dog owner who had previously encountered Christian Cooper, who Christian had yelled at in the park, instructing him to leash his dog. And as Jerome tried to walk away from Christian, Christian pursued him, and Christian attempted to lure his dog away with dog treats, just as he had with Amy. And even further, Jerome felt threatened, and he asks him to stop. Christian won't stop, and eventually there is a physical altercation. Jerome pushes Christian to the ground, and Christian screams for someone to call the police, but the encounter pretty much ends there. Jerome walks on with his dog, and that is about the end of it.
So when Christian Cooper said in that meeting audio that he'd been assaulted in pursuit of this niche war, this was very likely the interaction he was referring to, and it frankly doesn't sound so good. Jerome describes feeling threatened himself and Christian pursuing him as he tried to get away, and that seems to fit the pattern of how all of these interactions with Christian went, right down to the helmet. And no, of course, Amy didn't know any of this at the time, right? That's not the point. But it does at least establish a level of credibility for the way that she characterizes this event in her interview here, while her account on its own would be worth, let's be real, much less. It's hard to know what to make of all of this. It does seem strange that of all the news accounts of this, there was absolutely no discussion, it seems like, of the fact that what Christian said to Amy could be perceived by a reasonable person to be threatening. I'm going to do something and you're not going to like it is a sketchy thing to hear from some random guy while you're in a park alone. One who describes himself, by the way, as a big guy to the point where he expressed surprise when he was talking at the meeting that people were daring to get physical with him, as you may recall. But going back to Camille's interview with Amy, she describes the strange way that she recalls Christian's entire demeanor shifting when he pulled out his phone and started recording. Again, grain of salt.
I move towards him, and it's really weird because he's still standing there, same very physical posture. And suddenly out of him comes this voice from a man who's been very dominant towards me, suddenly, almost this victimized voice saying, don't come near me, don't come any closer, almost like he's terrified of me. And I'm like, to me, that's even more terrifying now because it's, you've gone from screaming at me. If you kept screaming at me, at least it was consistent. But now his whole verbal demeanor has changed.
What Amy is essentially saying here is that he went from a dominant demeanor, not afraid of her at all, to suddenly pulling out his phone, changing his voice and posture to appear afraid and on the defense. And she says this deeply unsettled her further. Camille then reveals another very interesting piece of the puzzle we didn't have before. He tracked down the phone call that Amy placed to police that fateful day, and it seems to reveal the true reason she appeared to be getting increasingly frantic with the 911 operator, which you'll recall a lot of people said was a performance.
New York City 911, do you need police, fire, medical? I'm sorry. Your phone is breaking up really bad. I can't hear anything you're saying.
You record me? Myself and my phone.
Ma'am, I cannot hear anything. The phone is breaking up really bad.
Immediately when the call goes through, I realize it's a bad connection, and they can't hear me and I can't hear them.
So it sounds like Amy is here saying that the reason she got so frantic on the phone, increasingly more and more upset, was because they couldn't hear her. Finally, Camille asks Amy a burning question that everyone has asked since this started. Why did you keep insisting on pointing out his blackness?
You said to him, I'm going to tell them, referring to the police, that an African-American man is threatening me. Why did you say African-American man in that context?
Sure. And, I think to understand that question is to really think about this in the broader context of what had already transpired at this point. I was in a situation, I was a woman, I was alone in a park. I had been threatened multiple times at this point. My dog was trying to be lured away from me. And, to the same extent, if it had been a white man, I would have said, there's a white man threatening me. If it had been a white woman, I would have said, a white woman is threatening me. Mm-hmm. It was just a descriptive term.
And during the call, you similarly mentioned race a couple of times. Can you describe sort of what you were thinking in that context and why you might have done it then?
So, once again, it was that same descriptive phrase. I think, the initial time I say it, it's something like a man who's African-American with a bike helmet. And then I think she's cutting me off saying, I can't hear you, repeat yourself. And I'm just condensing it down. So it becomes from a man who's African-American to an African-American man.
You're struggling to be heard here. You're not, emphasizing
exactly.
race in this context.
So, people think I'm getting more and more hysterical, which I am, but not because of him, but because I'm on with this operator who is basically repeating over and over again, I can't hear you. Which is, an absolutely terrifying situation when you're calling for help and someone's saying they can hear you.
Mm-hmm. So asked about the thing at the root of this accusation, that she's racist, Amy says that this was just a descriptive phrase she was using, and if it was another ethnicity like white, she would have done the same. But that this was just essentially to make sure the police knew what her ostensible assailant looked like. But I have to be honest, I have one huge problem with that characterization of what happened, and that's if that was just a descriptive term she was using to identify the physical attributes or characteristics of her assailant to the 911 operator, why then did she insist on telling Michael, before she had even gotten on the phone with 911, that she was going to tell police that there was an African-American man threatening her in the park?
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
As you can clearly see, she wasn't on the phone with police yet. Her only audience at this point was Michael and Michael's phone. And obviously, if Michael was the one posting the video, the people watching would know it was Michael, let alone that he was black. So there's no practical purpose in telling the phone audience that. Really, she was just saying this to Michael. And what would be the practical purpose, you have to wonder, of telling Michael that he's an African-American man? He knows that. The interview wraps up with Amy describing briefly that she faced a mob of protesters outside her house and how she fled to a safe house the next day and told her family to tell people she didn't exist or they didn't know her. Okay, so fast forward to September 23rd, 2021. Recall that right before this interview in August, she had filed a lawsuit against her previous employer, claiming racial and gender discrimination. She fought this out in the court for a couple of months, but ultimately after reviewing her claims, Judge Ronnie Abrams outright rejected those claims in a 17-page ruling. So her lawsuit failed, perhaps unsurprisingly, before it even got in the door. And for quite some time, this appeared to be the end of the Amy Cooper saga. But lo and behold, more than 2 years later, on November of 2023, Amy wrote a story for Newsweek. She wrote and published the article through Newsweek, and I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but it tells us that she's still, 2 years later, living in hiding, and recounts the incident much the way she did in her interview with Camille, adding that she was very concerned that Christian was going to poison her dog with the treats he carried. She brings up Jerome and his encounter with Christian, as well as the other encounters that news stories failed to report on. She also admits that her initial statement the day after the incident was the suggestion of a PR team that she had hired at the time. She tells us she still can't get a job to this day that meets her qualifications and still fears appearing in public at all. She even says she attempted to reach out to Christian directly, to no avail. She also dives into a major question I've had in all this. Why did she place a second call, the one she was charged for, where she claimed that Christian was assaulting her if he clearly had not? She tells us that in the country she grew up in, verbal assaults were treated as assaults, which is definitely the case in many countries, and that this accusation stemmed from her poor understanding, essentially, of US law. And perhaps this is why the charges were ultimately unsuccessful in putting her in jail, though I would argue her characterization here of the charges being dismissed doesn't quite make sense when she was, as we know, forced to finish several therapy sessions as part of her getting out of the charge. If it were outright dismissed, as she said, she would have been off scot-free with no addendums or qualifications whatsoever. She then laments the damages of cancel culture and finally ends her piece with this. There is no such thing as a Karen, she says. We are all just people, each of us deserving grace and forgiveness. In the end, silencing the truth, the full story, hurts all of us. To end today's story, let's take everything we've just learned and watch this fateful clip one more time.
Would you please stop? Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the Ramble, and there is a man, African American, he has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And my... I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately. I'm in Central Park in the Ramble. I don't know.
Thank you.
So, what do we think, folks? This is about as thorough a picture as I feel I can possibly paint here, and as I said, this story is a super complicated one. I'm very curious to see what you all make of all this. Was Amy Cooper judged too harshly for this incident, or do these nuances ultimately leave your opinion of her unchanged? Was the failure to report these nuances a gross failure of the press? Did Amy really only report him for assault because she was confused about the specifics of American law regarding assault, or was that just an excuse? Let us know in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and I'll catch you later. Deuces!